Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/16 scale radio-controlled M4 90mm Sherman tank hybrid. Chances are this is a build that my normal viewers did not see coming, and it's always fun to throw a curveball every now and then. This model, unlike many other smaller scale builds which are built for commission and belong to a private collector, the model that you see here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, like I often mention in these videos, I often take on commission build projects from vehicles ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information will be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. This build here is a bit of a departure from the other smaller scale builds, which were really polished versions of the type of tank that I started out with, i.e. a Tiger or a Sherman. This guy here really went through a heavy upgrading and conversion process to get him to the specs that you see here. This build here features a lot of components sourced from aftermarket sources, as well as a few new scratch build components which were added to the EastCoastArmory.com product line. All of these additions, as well as the sources where to find all these components, are listed in the video description below and will also be discussed in further as the video continues. So stay tuned. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around the model. This vehicle here is the M490. The M490 was a unique prototype vehicle which was intended to upgun the Sherman tank to that of a 90mm gun. The concept of upgunning a Sherman with more larger ordnance actually dates back to around 1942 and 1943, in which experimental versions of 76 and even a 90mm gun were fitted in the standard 75mm Sherman turret. These met with some success in that they were physically able to get the gun mounted inside of the tank, and the tank did perform with the gun. However, some complaints was that due to the size of the standard 75mm turret, the crew interior was deemed to be too cramped. Another issue that was stonewalling these projects was the Army brass itself, which was hesitant in equipping a tank with a larger caliber gun in field. As for why the top brass were stonewalling and dragging their feet on this program, has to do with a multitude of issues, many of which have been debated and argued since the last 70+ years. Frankly, I don't have enough time to go over these issues in this video, as it's not necessarily important for this model. However, if people do want to discuss the topics, you can in the comment section listed below. Fast forward to late 1944 and early 1945, the U.S. Army really needed to equip a tank with a 90mm gun in the European theater of operations, better to deal with the German heavy tanks which were running around at the time, namely that of the Tiger and the King Tiger more specifically. The M26, or at this time the T26E3 Pershing, was formally adopted and was starting to enter into production. However, because the M26 Pershing's hull design was so much different compared to that of the Shermans, the tanks did require a lot of retooling necessary to equip the factories in order to get the tanks into full production. This was going to require a lot of time in order to get the facilities ready to go. However, during this time, there were several turret castings which were entering into full production. The turrets were able to enter into full production as the tooling required to make the turrets were very similar to that of the Shermans, and they were able to simply switch over production lines for that of the T26E3 turrets. Because there were so many turrets on hand and not enough Pershing hulls, they had a stopgap idea in which they could equip and upgrade a standard Sherman tank with that of the turret from the T26 Pershing. The way this was done was they simply took the body of a Sherman tank and just dropped a turret from a Pershing on it. As strange as this sounds, this was not necessarily very difficult at all, as literally the turret ring of the Sherman and the turret ring of the Pershing are the exact same dimensions. So literally no adjustments or modifications needed to be made to either the T26 turret or the hull of the Sherman. Since Sherman hulls were at this time very prolific, as the tanks were in full production, have been for many years, there was a surplus of Sherman hulls, and the idea is actually pretty sound. The idea was approved by the brass, and so a pilot model needed to have been assembled. To assemble the pilot model, they took a Sherman variant off the production line and mated it with a on-hand turret. The version of the Sherman that was utilized was an M4 105mm Sherman. This variant of the Sherman has the wet ammunition storage. The large bow hatches, however, still retains the radial engine of the M4. The turret that was utilized was a very early initial production batch of the T26 turrets. What signifies the T26 turret from the T26E3 and onward production turrets is that the T26 turret actually has a small integral lift ring which is molded into the side portion of the turret. This feature was dropped as the production geared up and commenced on the Pershing's turrets. This pilot vehicle was so early in its developmental period that literally 0 changes were made to the lower hull and the turret. The Sherman's lower hull still had all of the 105mm equipment for boat storage, as well as the wet ammunition storage system for the 105mm ammunition. Obviously, if the tank was to develop further in development, the storage barrel clamp would have more than likely have been changed due to the longer barrel of the gun, and the interior ammunition racks would have been altered to better suit that of the larger, more substantial in size 90mm rounds for the 90mm gun. As for the turret, just like with the hull, 0 changes were made, and the turret still retains its spare track rack mounting system for the all single pin steel track links which were found on the T26 Pershings. I believe that the vehicle did get its approval to go ahead and enter into its testing phase at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. However, what happened with this project was by the time everything was all said and done, the tooling and the production of the M26 Pershing hulls was in full assembly. And so with the supply of hulls now filling up, this project was no longer deemed necessary and was axed. It's a pity that the project got axed because the concept of the 90mm gun-equipped Sherman was probably a very good one and one that was desperately needed in the field at that time. Chances are really great that if the tanks would have entered into production, you would more than likely have seen this turret equipped on tanks with the M4A3 GAA-equipped lower hull, as well as maybe even tanks with the HVSS suspension, as both of these versions of the Sherman were the most prolific and common in the ETO theater at this time. As for the fate of the prototype, more than likely the turret was removed off of the pilot and just mounted onto a newly manufactured M26 Pershing hull, and the Sherman body received its 105mm turret and lived the rest of its days as a M4 105. One photograph is known to have been taken of the pilot model, and that image is seen in the lower corner of the screen. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit started like, as well as some of the aftermarket parts that went into it. And here's the model just before the start of the project. For the base starter kit, I will be utilizing the Heng Long M4A3 105mm Sherman tank model. Now currently, the way you see it here, it's wrapped up in its original carton, and this was the box that the model came in. The model was procured off of eBay for about 3 weeks ago, and once it came in, I gave it a quick test drive, put it back in the box, and put it in storage until I got to the kit. The vendor in which the model was procured is listed in the link below, as well as in the video description. And the model was shipped very quickly and was had for a very decent price. The model will be opened up from its original shipping carton now, with the use of my little box cutter. Okay, cracking open the box has a more of a consumer style packaging. Here we have the Heng Long model. For anyone who has purchased one of these tanks before, you'll know exactly, or this should not be any surprise to you. Here we have the model itself with some smoke coming out of it, as well as some features, namely that of the battery, as well as the other type of highlights which are found, or options that can be added to this model here. And of course we have other kits which are found in the Heng Long tank line. Now this model here is the standard base run Sherman tank, which is found on eBay. There are several other options available for this exact same model, in which some are upgraded with metal sprockets, metal track, as well as also metal gearboxes. The version you see here is the base starter, or the baseline model, in which all the components for the running gear are comprised out of plastic. By doing this, the cost of the base models are much lower compared to some of the other offerings which are found on eBay. However, the reason why I opted for the one with all the plastic suspension is that I have a lot of the metal components already on hand, and so purchasing a model with the extra metal bits was not necessary. Just like all Heng Long models, these guys here come fully ready to run, and the only thing that is not included is that for the AA batteries, which are for the radio itself. A 7.2 battery is supplied with these models. These models here, this Sherman specifically, has been on the market for a few years now, and this version here is the most current release of that version. If we notice on the box, we have here an older style radio present. This radio is not included with these models, as these models all now ship with a standard 2 GHz radio, which is a very nice touch, of which I'll be going over further as the video progresses. Now, without further ado, I'm going to crack open the box. And take the model out, show what the base starter vehicle comes with. Okay, first we have here a very Tamiya-esque manual that describes the new functions of the radio, which I'll be going over once the model is fully removed from its carton. The models are shipped in a typical style molded styrofoam interior liner, which does do an adequate job in keeping everything in place and from getting damaged. Here goes your standard manual. Has the basics of the model, how to run it, as well as maintenance and so on and so forth. And here's the model now unboxed. As you can see, just like with most other pre-built ready-to-run models, it comes pretty well sealed in its molded styrofoam packaging, and the model just simply slides on out. And here's the model now. As for the type of Sherman, this is a M4A3 105. What this means is that the lower hull is that of the M4A3 Sherman. It's more specifically a late pattern M4A3. And the vehicle is fitted with the 105mm howitzer. These vehicles did see action during World War II in the Pacific as well as in the European theater. Now, in case anyone is wondering, these Shermans here are very similar to the version that was released by Tamiya. However, they are not the same type of tank. The Tamiya version is an M4 105 with a late pattern hull. The difference being the rear engine deck. This guy here, being a M4A3, has the Ford GAA V8, while the Tamiya variant would have the radial engine. Also, the Tamiya variant is that of an HVSS suspension, while this guy here has the earlier VVSS suspension. Both variants of the Sherman with the 105 are accurate and did also, again, see service during the war. As for the features that this vehicle has, Like I said before, it features out of the box plastic running gear for both the sprocket, rear idler, and the track, as well as a plastic gearbox. The vehicle also features a smoke system, sound system, LED lighting system, turret rotation and gun elevation, flickering machine gun, as well as this one in particular has the airsoft gun fitted. Now there are some versions out there that have the flash and the infrared, however this one is just your plain Jane airsoft BB gun firing model tank. This tank here also has the 2 GHz radio, which is a nice feature, and it does have the old pattern style antenna for the older pattern of radio. However, this here is just for detail purposes and will serve no detail function with the actual radio that comes with the model. The tanks are powered by a 7.2 battery, which is underneath this panel here. Take out the screw, plug in your battery, and you're ready to run. Now, one thing about these kits is that since the molds do date back for a few years ago when they had the older style radio system, the older style radio systems had a multi-function type system in which you could change the channel around so you could have 2 vehicles running at the same time. This was done by a small little switch, which would have been located here on the side of the hull. Now, when the vehicles were upgraded with the new 2.4 GHz radios, this system was dropped. However, the hole is still present on the side here of the model and does need to be contended with by the builder. In addition to that, there's also one main kill switch here on the bottom, which powers the entire tank. As you can see, at some point there was both a external volume control as well as another style of switch, which would have been located in this location here. Again, these here are just 2 ancillary holes which are found on the model's casting and do not need to be worried about. As for the details, they are typical of that you would find on a ready-to-run model Heng Long. There is some weld detailing apparent as well as other surface details. Most of these during the build will be replaced with better versions by myself. Here is the tank's radio. Like I said, it's a 2.4 GHz radio. Now, what's unique is that this is the most current version of the 2.4 GHz. What is unique about this is that the functions were also added to the top portion here of the radio, and I'll be going over more of these functions during the test drive portion of this build at the end of the video. Needless to say, they did some things that were found on the older versions of the Heng Long as well as on some of the Taken tanks. Those little quirks were fixed with this radio here, and it's actually a pretty decent system. Of course, being airsoft, you get a little box full of BBs. This is standard on all of these ready-to-run 116s. The model also comes with a 7.2 battery. Now, what's unique is that the newer batteries that come with the newer versions of the Heng Longs are a lithium-ion battery, which feature 2 jacks. The main style Tamiya plug here is what powers the tank, and the smaller jack here is for that of recharging. It's important to note is that you cannot use a standard recharger to charge these batteries. A charger is supplied with the model that is designed to charge the lithium ions. It's also important to note that you might want to hold on to these chargers, as I tried to track one down recently separate, and they are not very easy to find separate from buying a whole tank itself. So that is something to keep aware of. Digging deeper in the box takes us to a box here with the accessories. These are just some plastic runners with some other surface details which are to be added to build a model, quote-unquote, out of box. We have here some equipment, 50 caliber ammo boxes, lift rings, as well as other detail odds and ends that cannot be fitted to the model prior to shipping. Here we have an M2HV. All these details will either be used, modified, or completely replaced with aftermarket or scratch-built versions. Finally, at the bottom of the box takes us to some more little accessories. We have here an unpainted figure, which is customary on these builds. Figure itself, it looks to be a copy from the Tamiya American Tank Commander, which is found on the Pershing kit, as well as probably the re-released Sherman 105, which came out a few years ago. And of course, all the way at the bottom of the box takes us to the smoke fluid, that of course you would need to refill the smoke fluid system from time to time. Now, this here is all that comes with the stock model. I will now be going ahead and showing the other accessories I purchased to upgrade the model from its stock configuration. Like I said, this tank originally has a plastic gearbox, and for plastic gearbox design goes, the standard plastic gearboxes are actually fairly decent. They will hold up well for most indoor use and for very light outdoor use as well. However, rather than using the stock gearbox, I went ahead and purchased an upgraded ball bearing and metal gearbox from Heng Long. This unit here was also purchased off of eBay and can be found from the following vendor. The gearbox itself is very nicely packaged. And what's nice is that these gearboxes are really a drop-in installation to the stock units. Here we have a close-up of the features on this gearbox. We have a better motor, and as well as you can see, rather than bushings or just rods that are put in holes that are found on this gearbox housing, there's actually small ball bearings. The gears are nice metal and they're broad gears, which is great for load distribution. And this gearbox does appear to be very nicely made. In addition to the left and right hand gears, the set also comes with a matching set of connectors, so no soldering is even required for you to swap out the system. As for the track, like I said before, the track is also going to be replaced with that of metal track. The metal track that you see here was a leftover from another Sherman build that I recently completed, in which that set was the metal upgraded one and came with an extra set of metal tracks. Rather than having them languish in my spare parts bin, I'll be utilizing them on this tank here. These tracks here replicate that of the metal steel chevron, which is a different power track compared to the stock kit. The stock kit gives you that of what would be the rubber chevron track, which is actually pretty decent that the medium would be rubber, as they do have this exact same pattern track in metal. However, for detail purposes, it's less than ideal, as when you run the tank on hard surfaces, the paint will eventually wear off on the metal tracks, showing metal, which is a continuity error, as the tracks on the real tank would be rubber padded. With the metal steel chevron, if the steel scratches, it actually improves the look of the model rather than hurting it. These tracks here are a simple drop-in install and replace the stock track. Now, currently not shown here would be a set of metal sprockets, which I have en route. Once they come in, again, they're a simple drop-in replacement for the stock plastic sprockets that you see here on the model. Now, the sprockets come in a set with the idlers as well. However, for the idler wheel on this model, I'll actually be retaining the plastic idler. The reason for that is that the idler is bushing mounted and does smooth and roll very effortlessly. Also, the pattern of idler found in plastic better replicates that of the real vehicle that I'm going to be building this tank as. The metal idler even though the pattern of idler is accurate for a Sherman, for this particular variant is not going to be suffice. And also, the plastic idler does not necessarily cause any wear and tear compared to other components like that of a sprocket, which needs to engage metal on metal track. The metal idler, as well as keeping the road wheels in plastic, isn't necessarily going to cause any harm. Now, the main change that this model will receive is that of a different turret. Rather than building this tank as the M4A3, like you've seen in the completed first shots of the model, the turret was swapped out for that of the turret from the M26 Pershing. For the Pershing turret that we have here, this is a Heng Long M26 Pershing turret. It was also acquired off of eBay from the following vendor listed below. The turret is, again, stock Heng Long, and if anyone has played around with any of the Heng Long or even taken Pershings, this is basically the same exact thing. Now, one issue on this version was that the gun is broken. Came in this way from the shipper. However, I can't really fault the shipper so much, as the component was well packaged in its box, and it appears that this damage occurred at the factory. The broken piece is very easy for me to repair, so there's no point in trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, trying to get or exchange it for a new turret. The turret, what makes this project so feasible is that the turret ring for the Pershing as well as the turret ring for the Heng Long Sherman are exactly the same. So swapping out the turrets is not necessarily going to be a time-consuming ordeal. For the turret itself, this is again an airsoft firing unit. Now the turret is from an older style Heng Long with the external pattern of antenna. Since this tank is 2 gigahertz, this is a totally ancillary piece and will be ditched during construction. One final accessory that I also purchased in addition to the turret is that of the actual Heng Long components for the M26. This gives you all the components to finish off and detail up the turret, as well as some other hull fittings which are required to be added to the Sherman in order to have it with the T26E3 90mm turret. One ding that I did notice on this particular Sherman is that of the rear engine deck. Now I don't know if that's because of this vendor or if it's probably just a batch from Heng Long. However, the engine deck we have here does feature some severe warpage. Now, luckily for this build here, this is not going to be an issue as the entire engine deck is going to be replaced. The engine deck itself is going to be amputated and replaced with this M4 engine deck, which is from a Tamiya M4 105mm Sherman. The origin of this engine deck here is, again, a spare part. It came from a Israeli 116 M50 conversion, which I did a couple years ago for a commission build. Since that build needed a IDF engine deck, this engine deck was simply amputated out with the Multimaster and has been sitting in my stash of spare parts ever since. Rather than having it languish away in the bin, this is going to be mated to the Heng Long upper hull, as the real tank that received the T26E3 turret was that of an M4 105 that had the radial engine and not the GAA. Starting with the model suspension and running gear, the suspension bogies that you see here are the stock originals but have been slightly reworked. The details that were added to them was the addition of the cast texturing, as well as the removal of the seam where the little center plug is found, which conceals the fastener which mounts the bogies to the hull. Now, prior to sealing off the bogies permanently, what I went ahead and did was I took all of the fasteners that secure the bogies to the tank and reapplied them with red Loctite. The red Loctite ensures that the pieces will never get loose on the tank during operation, as since the pieces are sealed up, getting access to them is going to be a very big chore, and will require a lot of body work to cover up the mess made for the procedure. On the bottom portion of the suspension unit, you'll see that I went ahead and added the ECA fastener detailing, which is missing on the kit. The ECA sets are little resin fasteners that have their details on them and simply get glued to the bottom of the bogie housings. This does increase the accuracy and as well as more of a detailed punch found on the stock model. As for the rear idler wheel, like I said in the unboxing portion of the video, I went ahead and kept the plastic rear idler wheels as the style of the plastic versions better replicates that of the actual pilot model of the Sherman than the metal ones which are found on the aftermarket scene, which are more for an M10 or another type of Sherman variant. The stock wheels were kept, however, what was changed on them was the deletion of that small little rim which is found on the stock Heng Long unit. On the Heng Long wheel, they went ahead and modeled the wheel as if it has a rubber tire, which, as I always say on these videos, is not true. The Sherman VVSS suspension did not have rubber-rimmed rear idler wheels, and they were steel. To improve the accuracy of the piece, with some sandpaper, I went ahead and just simply polished away the molded-in rim, thus deleting it. This was done to both sides of the wheel and was also done to both wheels in general. With the deletion of that component, the wheel's accuracy also gets bumped up compared to the stock original offering if you just leave it there as is. The wheel itself is weathered with that of scratch steel, as again these are steel rimmed, as are again the rear or the top mounted return rollers, which are also steel and do not have rubber tires on them. Moving our way to the sprocket and the track. Starting with the track you see here is the same track which was shown in the model unboxing portion of the video, and that track is spare Matto tracks from the Jumbo project, which I did a little while ago for commission. The track is nicely done and nicely rendered in both detail as well as functionality. As for the track's material, one thing I love about the metal track is that as the tank gets driven and the exposed high wear areas get worn, real metal will shine through, which will help the look of the model as the more it's driven. The way the track is painted was with my typical Parkerization style coloring, and the track on this version of the Sherman is steel throughout the entire link, which is important to note, as some Sherman tracks do have steel on the outside and rubber clad on the inside. This version of the track, however, it's steel through and through, so you just have to paint it with one color and weather it all uniformly. Moving to the sprocket that you see on this kit here is not the original kit supplied plastic versions. These are metal ones and are also from Matto. Now it's important to keep in mind that if you're upgrading one of these tanks and you're acquiring different parts from several different sources, like I did with this build here, it's important to know that there are two sets of metal sprockets on the market. Both are for the 116 Heng Long Sherman. The one set is made for the Heng Long pattern of track, and the other one is made for the Matto. The two look very similar, however, will not be compatible with each other, and I found that out the hard way. First set of sprockets I acquired were die cast. I threw them on the tank, and the track didn't fit. When I went ahead and did further research, I found that the sprockets need to be the Matto sprockets as well, and the ones I had weren't. The big difference between the two is that the Matto sprockets have a bell-shaped housing to them, and many times are listed on eBay and as well as on AliExpress as Matto sprockets. The other versions that are made for the Heng Long pattern of track have the exact same stepped appearance as the plastic sprockets from Heng Long. Moving our way to the tank's gearbox. Like I said in the unboxing portion of the video, the tank's gearbox was upgraded from the stock original plastic and nylon gearbox to one of these Heng Long high-performance ball bearing and metal gearboxes. So far, when I've seen, the gearbox quality seems to be pretty well, and it's been holding up so far with the running that I've been doing. However, it is important to point out that with these blue motors that are found on these gearboxes here, the tank goes a lot faster and can pick up and go like a rocket ship. More information on that is to follow in the test drive portion of this video. Before I go any further though, it is important to point out that shortly after the completion of the model and after a little bit of running time, I did notice that this track here developed a little bit of play to it. And what I mean is that this here is the normal type of play you find on these gearboxes. But if you push the tank, these spindles will move approximately 1/8 of an inch before they lock up with the gears. This is normal, like you can see here. After a little bit of running time, this track here would have about 1/2 of an inch of play before it would engage the gear. Obviously something needed to be examined. So I took the tank apart, as well as took off the front transmission cover, and saw that the gear for the final drive, which goes out to the output shaft, this gear here is held onto the spindle via a small grub screw, which is found in the center portion of the gear. During the operation, the fastener inside the gear worked itself loose and became loosened and wasn't gripping onto the flat of the shaft, which is milled on the inside. If I did not go ahead and address this earlier, what would have happened is that this fastener would have thoroughly have loosened up, and finally it would have not made contact with the spindle and the gears would just be slipping. To go ahead and fix it, I first tried to take out the fastener, which I did with a small Allen wrench, added a drop of Loctite, and remounted it into its spacing. Unfortunately, what happened was that these fasteners here are so tiny that they strip very, very easily, and that's exactly what happened. About halfway into the procedure in reinstalling the fastener, the grub screw stripped out and I was no longer able to get it on, and the gearbox was effectively at that point ruined. What I was able to do was to salvage it with a 1/16 of an inch drill bit. I drilled directly through the fastener into the spindle and out directly through the opposite side of the gear. I went ahead and took a 1/16 of an inch brass rod and slid it inside of this new hole, thus pinning the entire gear to the spindle. On the opposite end, the hole popped out literally right between the two gear teeth, which made removing of the extra material with a Dremel and cutting stone very simple. I just went ahead and carved away the extra brass from the rod on both ends of the gear, thus restoring the gear to being a full gear. A small drop of fine liquid super glue was added, seeped inside, and the whole unit is now locked firmly in place. Now, to prevent this type of situation from happening to anyone else in the future, what I strongly recommend to do is that just prior to the installation of the gearbox inside the tank, take a drop of very fine liquid CA and put it into this well here, and as well as onto this fastener here. What the CA will do is act as a Loctite and will firmly keep the fasteners in place, clunking up the threads and preventing them from working themselves loose. This will be a lifesaver and solve a lot of headaches and potential issues which could happen in the future. As if the piece eventually threads out to a certain point, the gears will still be turning and the gear could either fall out completely, in which best case scenario falls inside your tank, which you can just find and reinsert it, or worst case scenario, the piece gets popped out, falls within the gears and literally destroys your gearbox. So no win situation either way. So again, the CA is strongly recommended if using one of these gearboxes.